Welcome to the St. Joseph Radio Presents live program, broadcasting to you from the Rome of the West, St. Louis, Missouri. The program that for over 30 years has brought you eloquent speakers from across the globe to help explain, clarify, and evangelize the Catholic faith. Our program covers a variety of topics relating to current issues and occurrences in our daily lives. Now, with the aid of technology, we are able to bring the gospel message to the four corners of the world, where Christ himself did say, "Those who have ears ought to hear." It is our hope at St. Joseph Radio that through these programs we can help evangelize the world and change one soul at a time. Now, here is your host to introduce today's guest and topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is St. Joseph Radio, and you are listening to Man to Man. I'm Mark Serafino with my co-host Mike Hayworth, and today we have an extra special guest with us, Canon Matthew Talarico. Canon, before we start the program, would you mind starting us with a prayer?
Let us pray. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. May the Lord grant us health of body, mind, and soul. May he grant us strength in our labors and patience in our trials. May the Lord grant us grace and joy in doing his holy will each and every day. This we ask with the intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Queen of the Most Holy Rosary, and of St. Joseph, the patron of men and of fathers. Amen.
Thank you, Canon. So welcome to the show, and welcome back to St. Louis. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serafino. It's wonderful to be here. I was ordained here in St. Louis at the Cathedral Basilica by then Archbishop Burke in the year 2007. So coming back to St. Louis is like a spiritual home for me.
Yes, and Mike and I were with our families, we're just so blessed to be at your ordination.
It was wonderful.
And it is still a tremendous memory in our family that we still revisit and talk about. So maybe you could tell our guests, our listening guests, who you are, what your religious order is, and what do you do? Why are you here?
Well, I'm blessed to serve with the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, and our community is a worldwide spiritual family of priests living in community as canons, along with clerical oblates, who are brothers in the family of the Institute, and religious sisters as well, the Sisters Adoras of the Royal Heart of Jesus. And we also have a lay branch of the Institute called the Society of the Sacred Heart. And our community started in 1990 and is serving in 12 countries around the world and in 21 dioceses across the United States. And since my ordination, I've served in the Archdiocese of Newark, New Jersey was my first assignment in 2007, 2008. And then I moved to Chicago to our provincial house, where I've served at the Shrine of Christ the King and served in the leadership of the Institute and doing a lot of work with our vocational program as well for men over the last 15 years since that move. And so I frequently travel around the country to our apostolates from coast to coast, from California to Connecticut, Louisiana up to Wisconsin, especially throughout the Midwest. And we're really excited. We just opened two new apostolates of the Institute, one in the Diocese of Cleveland, St. Elizabeth Shrine, and the St. Paul Oratory in the Diocese of Worcester, Massachusetts, just about 10 days ago.
Congratulations. That's excellent news. And the growth of the Institute in the years that we've been affiliated has been just a blessing in every town and every city that you come. And we thank you very much for that and for bringing the faith to us in the way that the Institute of Christ the King does.
Thanks be to God, and thanks for your prayers and support.
Absolutely. So it's not a secret. We invited you here to talk about something that is pressing in our culture today, and it's about a crisis of manhood. I don't think that we're revealing anything profound when Mike and I in our shows repeat the message that there is a crisis in manhood within and outside of the church. And from your perspective, I think a priest always has a perspective that, as obviously we lay people can't have. You have like a different 30,000-foot view where we may be very more micro-focused on our own families. So we would love to hear from you on that view on so many different topics. And we'll start with your perspective as a priest, and you're also the provincial superior of the Institute of Christ the King here in the United States. How have you seen the role of manhood change in your years since ordination?
Well, I see men today, especially young men, they face a lot of challenges. They come sometimes from broken families without fathers, so sometimes there are wounds. They can be very sensitive. They, at the same time, fall prey sometimes to things like addictions or bad habits. They have trouble making decisions. We see things like ADHD, for example, so challenges spiritual, psychological, etc. At the same time, I also see a great hope. I see a lot of young men looking for something. They're really they want to give their lives to something that's greater than them. They do want to serve, and they're just looking for opportunities. They're looking for invitations. They're looking for support, and they are hungering for something. And once they get a taste of it, then they want more. So I see, a lot of things that are heart-rendering, to be frank, but also there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of fertile ground for the future with men today.
I think hope, Michael, is something you and I have seen locally among some of the young men, too.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that, when you mention that, is how important it is to know the opportunities that are out there. I'll go back to a little bit of the military experience. When I left my hometown, I really loved where I come from, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me. And I saw the military as that opportunity. And it was a huge opportunity where I was like, okay, there's all these different things that I could do, but it kind of focused me. And I kind of think of that same thing with our faith, is that ability to focus somebody on things that will bring us up to a higher plane than where we started out at. And I'm so thankful. For me, I was a convert from the Baptist faith, and coming into the Catholic faith, seeing the fullness of the faith, it just was a wide expanse in front of me now versus where I was before. So another thing that I was very thankful for. So that's where I kind of see men right now trying to, figure out things along the way, and hopefully through these discussions, there's a few things that they could look at as another opportunity.
I think that the idea that you mentioned, Canon, broken homes, that is such a direct correlation to so many of the issues that young men are facing today. And then, of course, as a consequence, our culture and our society faces that because of the experiences they've had. That idea, in some ways, is the groundwork for why Mike and I agreed to start this show, is to create a conversation to uncover the hope that is there, because it's very, very easy. In fact, it's easy to the point of lazy to simply say, there's a crisis in manhood. Young men today don't know how to be men. End of discussion. Let's move on to the next point, right? So we've uncovered the obvious. Now what we want to try to do is uncover within there the hope for these young men. How do they find themselves? How do they move through the crisis and the trauma and tragedy where they may be in growing up in a broken home?
Right.
So I think part of what comes from that is you see in young men today a growing trend to delay commitment in their vocation, regardless of what their vocation is. And it seems that some young men are paralyzed by indecision, that inability to make a commitment. So, Canon, what advice could you give to young men who find themselves confused about their vocation in life, or their role in the community?
First, I would ask them to reach out. Look for someone to look up to, a mentor, sort of a father figure. I think young men today, a lot of times they're lonely, they're skeptic, they don't want to trust people, but they have to take that step. So open up their eyes and to identify who's a man they can look up to. Doesn't have to be, of course, no one's perfect and people can have flaws, but they have to find a man that has certain traits, certain qualities that they aspire to be and that they respect. So get support, reach out, and don't do it through the internet. Sometimes they think they can do it themselves by simply looking up websites, or they can kind of craft their own path to manhood. But on the internet, that can be very problematic. So find someone in person. Maybe the internet might even connect you with someone locally in person. But get a hold of someone in person, have a cup of coffee, ask questions, and listen.
What that person that a young man seeks, what qualities should that person have?
Yes. I think that person should have a good work ethic. That person has to have that man has to have accomplished certain things in life. He has to be a man of integrity, obviously, someone who himself is willing to give time and be generous, and someone that the young man feels comfortable listening to.
One of the things that I found along the way is that anybody that is able to be consistent in what they're doing, being forthright in how they speak and how they deal with people is very important to me. And that willingness to talk with you, that's another thing that not only does a person need to seek out, but somebody needs to be available as well. And
Right.
I want men to be available to each other because we just kind of don't have that communication piece. We're missing that, and that's what we all have to really work at.
It's very, very true. I wonder, Canon, if a gentleman says, I fit that description that Canon Talarico just gave. I have some accomplishment in my life. I'm a good work ethic, a man of integrity. And he's listening to us now in his home and says, I fit the bill. Now, how do I find someone? Is it reasonable, is it proper for him to maybe go to his parish priest and say, I'm available if you felt someone would need me? Is that a reasonable course to take?
That's very helpful. As a priest, you can give people advice, you can try to guide and nurture people, but you need practical examples to point to and say, seek out, talk to so-and-so. So-and-so has, this practical, lived experience, and you should talk to him or talk to her. So as a priest, it's very helpful to have such men and women, both in a parish community, to be able to lead young people, to talk to and to seek out.
How many young men today are in the seminary at Cricigliano, where your seminary is located?
Well, thanks be to God, there's about 110 seminarians. There's also, we have a pre-seminary program for men to kind of discover what the priesthood is like, and the priesthood in the Institute specifically. So in the United States, on this pre-seminary program, we have 18 men this year. We just started in September, and they live in community along with our priests. So about 3 or 4 per location. And that's very important so that the young men feel they're not alone. They have other young men like them who are trying out the same thing. So they can support each other. But the number is only 3 or 4 so that there's enough for them to do around the oratory, around the shrine, around the parish. So they can, of course, study their languages like Latin, and French is our common language because it's the language of our patron saint, St. Francis de Sales, whose spirituality we ascribe to. But at the same time, they also need to be hands-on. They need to do sacristy work, train the altar servers. They need to clean up after themselves. They need to volunteer around the parish. They need to be with the priest as he goes and visits the sick in the hospitals and blesses family homes, and really see firsthand what the priesthood is like. So we find that very encouraging for young men. It's very daunting to go all the way to seminary right off the bat, especially when our international seminary is located in Florence, Italy. It's quite a step. But if they can live, somewhere closer to home without a huge commitment, but still making commitment nonetheless to live in community, observe what the priests do, live it a little bit, and then kind of see are they attracted to live this, or are they attracted to something else? So it's kind of a good first stepping stone to discovering a priestly vocation. We also have brothers in the Institute. We call them clerical oblates. And the oblates also do much the same. They are men of the altar who participate in the parish life and volunteer and give their time and their effort to help the priest to take care of the people for the glory of God.
It's the work that stood out to me.
Yes.
I've watched young men come through, many of them through the seminary that were candidates for the seminary, and they work. And that's a huge thing to watch, is the ability to take on this life, learn its intricacies, and be able to move forward and understand, okay, this is really what I want to do, but there is work involved in that. That's not an easy task.
Well, how much of their formation in the priesthood involves work versus study? Is it a balance? And does it kind of slope? So that you work more in the beginning, study harder towards the end, and it seems like that's a part of their formation is work.
Yes, indeed. So what we typically do with the men in the pre-seminary program is in the morning, after the morning office, which they chant along with the priests and the oblates, then we have Holy Mass, and then they study in the morning, and then in the afternoon they pretty much give that time to chores. So the importance for every man, regardless of his vocation, is that he devotes himself to something greater than him. And as much as he does that, he will find happiness, he will find fulfillment, he'll find an order in his life that will bring peace, even amidst all the sacrifices. But if a man lives only for himself, if he only wants to satisfy his own kind of urges and his own kind of lower desires, as it were, then he'll feel out of place, he'll be unhappy, and he'll fill a void within him that nothing else can fill. And so when we work, we're there to serve others, we're there to help others, to lighten their loads. And by helping others in charity, we help ourselves. We find a joy in that outgoing charity. And men need to do that. We love, as men, by making sacrifices for the good of others, and also by holding ourselves to a certain discipline of life in view of some kind of a good. So by praying, for example, day in and day out, we wake up early, we drop what we're doing, and we go to the church to pray later in the day. We're there to intercede for people, to pray for people. There's a very high mission to that. And holding ourselves to that discipline out of love of God and of neighbor really brings a joy that nothing else in this world can give.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It is. It's the word I keep coming back to is service. I keep thinking about that over and over again. When I see the young men working in the church, it amazes me the amount of service they're willing to give to not only the parishioners, but around the community as well. It's such a huge improvement to have these young men be available. I mean, they're preparing the sacristy, they're preparing for the Mass. All these things are happening, and it's because they love God and they feel there's an obligation there to do things. So I think it's beautiful that they've gone through so much and are willing to go forward with that.
Well, hey, you're listening to St. Joseph Radio. Man to Man is the show. I'm Mark Serafino. My co-host is Mike Hayworth, and we're here with our special guest, Canon Matthew Talarico. Work ethic. That seems a common thread, right? It was certainly a thread in what you said about the religious life, but you even mentioned it earlier than that, just in manhood. So how does a young man establish work ethic when he's reached an age where it's just not there? He needs to establish it. How does he go about building that?
I think he needs to start small. Start near you, either volunteering your time or simply any sort of a job, but just be faithful to it. Realize that you do have talents. A lot of young men lack confidence. They don't think that they're worth something. They have difficulties, and so they have trouble being consistent. But they need people to believe in them. They need, especially their own father figures, to have confidence in them. They do have talents. They really can make a difference. And so a young man needs to start there, and start small. And as he's consistent day in and day out, even you work at Walgreens, well, be consistent day in and day out. Show up on time. Be extra kind to people. It's not only what you do, it's how you do it. And if you try to make someone else's day. And if you take care of things well today, then don't worry about tomorrow. Because if you're doing well today in the day-to-day things, you show that kindness, you show that service, then tomorrow will come, and you'll prepare for that future of tomorrow by doing well today. So sometimes men they're fearful for the future. They don't know where to go. They really don't know what they want or what they're aspiring to. But if they do well today, where they are with the people around them, then today will pave the way to tomorrow.
I always think of the elephant, right? You're trying to look at the elephant and say, how do I take my first bite? And I'm glad you said start small.
Yes.
I mean, that's so important, because then it builds that habit that will build character. And those are the things that just builds manhood up to a point where it is elevated. And you still rely on God in every step along the way. But I like that you started small.
Well, and you had mentioned earlier in a conversation that men need discipline, and they need discipline in their lives. Where are they getting that discipline today? And it seems like from what you said, even as simple as starting the day with prayer, there's a discipline to that. It requires discipline to do it consistently.
Yes.
And taking that into your work. I know in a previous show we discussed how if you're going through a difficult time in your work, it's very easy to get distracted with emotional politics.
Right.
He gets paid more than me, or he got a promotion I should have gotten. And the more we wrap ourselves up in that, the less productive we are.
Right.
And the remedy to it is actually to go to work and say, today I'm going to do my job better than I've ever done it before. And just go through today. And then tomorrow, I'll worry about tomorrow, but I'm going to do it as well as it's ever been done.
Right here.
And it's interesting how that melts away that insecurity and the what's unknown. And it helps with, I guess you would call it fear.
That is so huge. Yes. Fear.
We're not supposed to admit it, but we have fear.
But it messes with everything. If we let fear jump in there and dominate our actions and our motivations, it paralyzes. That's what you mentioned before. It paralyzes us to make a decision. And a lot of times, if we just get past that fear and do whatever it is, number one, the fear it has a prominence of its own that we make of it than what it really is. There's a lot of times where I've faced a lot of different things where I'm like, if I'd have just taken that step, it makes a huge difference instead of, oh, I'm worried about this, wringing your hands, because you're not doing anything.
Yes. I would imagine that challenge comes even as a spiritual father. The fear of making sure that you've got all the bases covered.
Yes, I think men in general, we fear failure. And we fear to see ourselves fail and to have other people see that we are failing. But actually, failure is never final. We learn sometimes by our mistakes, by our falls. We go down a road and we come to a brick wall. Okay, well then we realize it's not an option. Well, let's adapt. Let's find another road. And even in that failure, we learn something that will help us to get to where we want to be. Sometimes it's kind of a zigzag life a little bit. It's never just a straight highway. And that's okay. The important thing is, the tragic thing in life is not to make mistakes. The tragic life is not to learn from them and to adapt and become a better person because of that.
Right. That's one of the beautiful things that confession offers to us.
Right.
To always start anew. We start small, but we always start anew every day. As you said, with morning prayer, every day is a fresh slate. Let's start again. Sure, we made a mistake the day before or whatever. Hey, we start anew and we keep trying once again. The devil always wants to discourage us. That's how he paralyzes us, and he makes us sad. We go into withdrawal, we brood, we kind of just nurse our hurts. We go into defense mode, and we cut ourselves off from others. But then we go into a tailspin, and things will go from bad to worse. Right. What we need to do then is start anew, start fresh, go out, maybe get a fresh piece of advice, read a good spiritual book, or just to enact a chair to spend time with someone around us who needs to connect with us. Go outside of ourselves to others, and in doing so, we'll discover more deeply who we are, and we'll see that we have a lot to offer, and that God's grace will help us, and we'll keep progressing forward.
You mentioned going outside and seeking the advice of others, and it occurs to me, and this is an extremely difficult thing to do, but to be willing to hear advice that contradicts the outcome you're hoping to get.
Right.
And that's a giant struggle, I think more so for men. Women may be more influenced by someone else's advice and say they may make them more doubtful, but men at times, I'm speaking as a man, are opposed to that opinion. I don't want to hear that because I've already kind of decided what the outcome is going to be. I was just hoping you would tell me I was right. Right? And that's a flaw, and it's a flaw that you have to fight to overcome.
A lot of times I always have been advised, and I might have given the advice, sometimes you don't want to ask the question because you already know what the answer is. But that's not the way to go. If you really truly want to know the truth, ask the question. Sometimes it'll kind of open up a blind side and see something that you didn't see from another person's point of view. And I think that's important that you take the courage to ask the question. It's important.
So, Canon, what year did you enter the seminary?
So I entered the Institute's formation program in 1999, And then I did a year of pre-seminary formation in the program I mentioned earlier. And then I did a second year because I came when I was 18. So I did a second year of preparation as well in Germany, being there in that environment, outside the United States. And then I entered our seminary in Italy right after 9/11 in 2001.
Okay. So from 1999 to today, it's not a revelation to say the world has changed at lightning speed, which would mean that the influence and the formation of men coming to seminary has changed, kind of gone along the path with it. Does that create a need within the seminary when you're planning out the formation, that you have to change the way you're interacting with the young men and not necessarily accommodate to them, but change the understanding and how you're going to connect to them? And
Yes, I believe that young men, especially today, they need a lot more personal attention. You have to listen to them more, you have to ask them more questions. You can't just assume that they get it. Maybe the intuition that men had before is not the same as what they have today. So to really spend time with them, hold them accountable in a positive way, and also compliment them. At the same time that we are, correcting or guiding, we have to also compliment, congratulate on a job well done. On this and that particular task. So also build them up, build up a healthy self-confidence. And that's also very important.
I find even when in work situations that's something that we've had to do is make the adjustment because generationally things have changed. And young men or young people along the way do need that affirmation a bit along the way to help them understand, yeah, I am making the right decisions or I am doing the right things. Or here's a little bit of advice to change a little bit, because that's what we want to focus on is improve the behavior and not the person, and no attacks that way. So I like that.
well, you're listening to St. Joseph Radio. This is Man to Man. We are going to take a short break, and we will be back.
Hi, this is Matt Loggeman with St. Joseph Radio with a great gift idea. A St. Benedict bracelet, a trendy accessory for men, women, and children that not only looks good on everyone's wrist, but is actually armor for the spiritual battlefield. This unique bracelet is handmade in Europe and contains 10 medals within the braided cord in the adult size and 7 medals in the children's size. On the front of each beautiful medal is St. Benedict holding a cross in his right hand, the object of his devotion. On the back of each medal is a cross. Surrounding the back of the medal and cross are the letters VRSN MVSMQLIVB, in Latin reference which translates, "Begone, Satan. Never tempt me with your vanities. What you offer me is evil. Drink the poison yourself." And finally, located at the top is the word Pax, which means peace. All bracelets come packaged with an informational card and a St. Benedict blessing which your local priest can administer. This gift is for everyone you love and care about, including yourself. Available from St. Joseph Radio. Check the website at www.saintjosephradio.net.
St. Joseph Catholic Radio is proud to announce the launch of SJEN TV, the St. Joseph Evangelization Network. SJEN TV is a premier online Catholic broadcasting network providing quality Catholic programming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have programming such as live studio interviews, St. Joe's Java speaker presentations, current Catholic issues, and the Pro-Life series. We're featuring the many talented speakers out of Orange County, California, and this Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri, including Professor John Gresham, Father James Mason, Karen Nokemper, Rick Hollerick, Bill Federer, and many more. To review the program list, go to sjen.tv or on Roku, SJEN TV. All this programming is free, and we are welcoming sponsorship of new programs. Find out more at sjen.tv.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Man to Man. My name is Mark Serafino with my co-host Mike Hayworth and Canon Matthew Talarico. Well, Canon, we mentioned earlier the idea of what I'll call old guys offering themselves as mentors to young men. And it sounds like it makes sense. It's a no-brainer, sure, that fits. But the question occurs, well, what exactly should older men be offering to younger men? What kinds of things should we be talking about? Certainly we're not theologians. We're not spiritual fathers. So what are the areas what topics maybe should we possibly be connecting with young men about?
I would say, first of all, just be available to young men, and that will work itself out. Because you might not know where to go. You might know if this young man is a good fit for you and vice versa. So simply be available, listen. And if you notice something in the young man, say, you do this well. Have you ever thought about this? The young man might not realize he does that well, and that could be a conversation starter. So try to build them up by noticing something good that they do, a trait, a quality, and encourage them in that. But simply be available, and then God will use you providentially in whatever way. You don't have to come, I think, with a certain plan. Just be there, and things will take off.
Great advice. Great advice.
Yeah. I like to be able to adjust on the fly almost, where situationally things will come up. I mean, that's just the nature of the game. So
Playing hockey.
Exactly, right.
Well, I think it's also important in those situations to have the humility to say, I don't know. If a young man asks you, to be able to say, gee, I don't know. I don't have experience in that area. Because to try to bluff your way through it, first of all, they'll see through that very, very quickly. And it affords the individual no help.
Right.
And it actually then marks you as someone, don't go to him because he doesn't know. So men who are listening, I think the message here is go out and reach out, be available to young men, be there to listen, to mentor, and encourage. That's the biggest part. This isn't about tearing them down. We're not in the military here. We're going to tear them down and rebuild them. Go out and be there to help build them up. And I think we can really affect this problem in our culture and in the church. One of the topics that we wanted to talk to you about was raising a boy. Boys and girls are lovely children. I have some of each. So do you, Michael. And they're both a joy in their own way. But since we're talking about a crisis in manhood, we'd like to focus at this point about raising a young boy. And their stages. In their early stages, that 5-year-old, 5 to 10, and then 10 through teens and on, that parents can play an important role in forming them. And I wonder, Canon, what would you say are some of the things parents should be looking at to help in that formation?
Well, first of all, I think that the greatest weakness of us men is that we don't pay attention. We have a lot of things on our mind. We have work to do. And so we're kind of in our world with this tunnel vision, but we have to really open up our eyes and pay attention to our families. Even if we're tired, end of a long day, we have to open up our eyes, our ears. And, having dinner, you're not just there to eat. You're there to really ask questions. Have, each child, what did they do that day? What are good things? Have them tell stories. So learn to pay attention and to ask specific questions to get other people to talk. Men, we have to be inviting to others. We have to show that a certain warmth. Be who you are. You don't have to be Mr. Personality, but ask questions, be inviting, and pay attention, first of all, to what's going on around you.
I really like that because, we've talked about it before, coming back from, different things, especially coming home and trying to understand and assess what's going on in the house. Mom might have been there all day. Could be that you're both working and you're coming back home and kids are kind of all over the place, but you got to assess what's going on and then how do I affect this? How do I change something that's going on, or how do I improve? Those are all good things that I think are so important that we have to be observant. We have to know what's going on.
Sometimes kids will put little words that they'll test the waters. They'll say a little thing and see how you're going to react.
Right.
And then they can see, can they really, do a deep dive and really, open up themselves and tell you everything. So you need to watch for those little things, be attentive, be open, don't be afraid, to be engaged on whatever level, and know that you are approachable.
It was always a great joy. I mean, I wish, in hindsight, I wish I could have done so much better than I did. But in those moments when I did do well, there was a great joy for me. It was a gift to sit at the dinner table and hear the children talk and tell me what they learned that day or tell me what their interests were. And one of the things that I found was it was easy because you listen and then the conversation kind of takes its own form. And there was a great joy. I loved hearing my children debating history, debate the Civil War, or talk about an element of our faith. I sat there, it was just so edifying, thinking, I didn't think like this when I was their age, and to be able to have the value to see that, the gift to see that, there's a tremendous gift in being able to be present and listen. But to your point, Canon, men don't do a very good job of it.
Right.
And there are often times we walk through the door, we're tired, we're preoccupied. What do I have to do tomorrow? I had a lot of traffic on my way home. This person really annoyed me at work. And we don't take the moment, even before walking through the door, to take the deep breath to say, this is what it's all about. I'm walking into this joyful haven. And it's unfortunate when we miss that opportunity.
Right.
And I think that's great advice, to be able to be there to listen. Are there boy activities that parents should encourage?
Yes, absolutely. Encourage the boys to be down to earth. Get outside and play. The boy likes to build things. When I was a boy, I loved the stars. I found that fascinating. So my dad gave me a book of the constellations, so I could read about the constellations, and I had a telescope. And so awaken in the young people a sense of wonderment in nature, a wonderment in building things, how things work. Really kind of encourage them to go out and to have a healthy curiosity about things. I think that's very helpful. So learn to ask questions of young people and get them to ask questions.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned building things. I have a 4-year-old grandson, and over the weekend we had some visitors from out of town, and one of my nieces asked if he could see his bicycle. And it was there on the ground in pieces. And she said, wow, what happened to your bicycle? And his mom said, oh, he took it apart. But it's his mom and dad are very accepting of that. They understand. He has a curiosity. How do things work? And he wants to learn and understand. Dad could put the bike back together.
Sure.
He'll probably disassemble it again. But there's great value in being able to do that. And when you can see children in their especially boys, in their natural boyness, in addition to everything else, it's actually it's cute to see them. I mean, My wife goes to pick up one of our grandchildren a couple days a week to take her to a school, and our grandson is usually standing outside waiting for her, holding his toy chainsaw. He's a busy boy. He's got things to do. And it's not something you teach them to do. But his mom and dad go along with that, and they encourage that. Now, he may have a sibling that would be standing outside with a book. That's okay, too.
Right.
So I'm imagining you kind of have to also discern then who your children are, where
yes.
they are.
What are
and
they
you have
involved
to ask questions. Ask questions of them, and also learn to adapt. As they get older, when they're younger, you're really telling them, look, more, do this or do that to a certain degree. But as they get older, you have to persuade them as they become teenagers. Persuade them, convince them, and ask them questions. Okay, so if you're going to do X, Y, or Z, son, well, then what's going to happen? What's going to be the consequence of that? Try to walk them through that process. Okay, well, if you're going to do that, then then this could happen. Or this, well, gee, Dad, I never thought of it like that. Have you seen this happen before? So try to get them to think through, not just think impulsively, but to think through, what are the consequences of my actions?
Amen.
How do my actions influence other people? And as they get older, you have to get them thinking along those lines. And also get them thinking about exactly the why of things. So you have to explain, well, son, we have this rule in the house for this particular good. There's a reason behind this, and let's talk about that. And what happens when that rule is not followed? Look at the chaos, the disorder, the agitation there is in the household.
Right.
So try to get them thinking a few steps ahead of where they are right now.
That's great advice.
That's one of the biggest challenges, I think, that when you get into, I'll go back to the military, guys will come in and not realize the consequences that they take when they make a certain decision. They don't think 2 steps farther. Okay, I drank this, I got in my car, and I did this. Everything seemed fine until the blue red lights are behind me, and then all of a sudden the consequences, all the things that are bad, are starting to come and be realized. It's too late. So I think it's so important to think through these things, because that's a lot of times what happens. They don't think 2 steps farther than, and I'm not saying just young men have to do that. They have to think. It's so important.
I had my father-in-law was a pretty big executive in the retail business. And he encountered people from all different walks of life at various levels of importance, if you will. And he had a measure for what he would say about certain people, that whether or not his assessment of them would be he or she either can or can't get to step 2. And he would in fact, he had a plaque that would say, get to step 2, or whatever the wording was. But that element is something, what you're saying, Canon, is you can help form your son to be able to do and train your son. And, Michael, I led people in the civilian world, and that was always a point of frustration when you would have an individual make a decision without any thought for step 2.
Right.
And, you would think, did you not realize there was a step 2? This doesn't end here. So how do we get to that point? And I think it's a very valuable tool to teach, especially boys, the consequences of the steps they take.
One of the other words that I always kind of emphasize is ought, because some people don't realize that just because you can doesn't mean you ought to do that.
Right.
And if you could just think through those things and just go, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Right.
So one of those I always like to reemphasize.
Right. So then boys grow up and they get to a stage, and I don't want to put age number on it because it's different for every boy, but they reach a point where they kind of are smarter than you. They no longer need you, but it's almost as if they're out to prove to you that I can do this without you. Those are difficult times for parents. And it's a two-way street. They're difficult time for parents because our son is acting differently than we've seen them act, differently than we would like them to act. And as a parent, sometimes we take those two elements and immediately arrive at, this boy is wrong, something is wrong with him, and it's all on him. And I don't think it is. I think it's always a mutual street. So how do you work through that?
I think that young men, when they're very young, they think that when I get to become an adult, I'll be free and I can do what I want. And doing what I want is what a man is all about. But as they get older, and I've had this conversation with some teenagers, I say, look, as you get older, you realize that manhood is not doing simply what you want, it's what needs to be done according to this or that circumstance. You're there to actually help people. So happiness in life does not come from just doing whatever you want. That's going to really get you into trouble more often than not. But it comes from doing things that are meaningful, that are fulfilling. But he has to learn that sometimes the hard way. So sometimes, he's going to go out and do a certain thing that he wants to do. You see that's not good for him, but stay close by.
Right.
And if he fails a little bit, he struggles, he's going to come to a moment of disillusionment, and then he's going to need your hand to kind of pick him up. So be close by, ask questions, and say, son, you want to do this, but what are the results going to come from that? And if he wants to just prove it, well, okay. Sometimes you have to allow the children to make mistakes a little bit, be close by so they don't do a free fall, but allow them to, come face to face sometimes with the consequences of their actions, and then just be there to help them, to guide them, to pick them up again.
I have a great story to support that. My wife's uncle had 5 sons, and the oldest son, he got into trouble a bit, and he liked to test the waters. And when he was in high school, one Friday night, he and his buddies decided that it would be good to vandalize and deface the property of the school principal. And they got caught, and they were arrested. And it wasn't it was his first time being arrested, but it wasn't his first time in trouble. So the police called her uncle's house and said, we have your son in custody here, and we're going to have to keep him for the night, or you can come and get him. You can come and get him tonight. We'll release him in your custody. Otherwise, he has to spend the night. And the dad said, okay, and your son wants to talk to you. So they put the son on the phone, and Dad said, well, Bob, the police tell me you got yourself in a little trouble. Here's what you did. Yeah. Did you do it? Yes, I did. And his dad said, see you in the morning. And he said as he was hanging up, he could hear his son saying, oh! And that straightened that young man out. And that's one of those, sometimes when they make that kind of a mistake, consequences, accountability. And it's almost like at that age, they're especially serious.
Right, and that's the difference, is like that accountability or that consequence, the earlier it happens and the lesson learned earlier really kind of sets the pace for the rest of their life. Because if you do it at a later stage when things are kind of serious, they have an impact that probably could be a mark on your record from now on, versus when it's a little thing, we can deal with those experiences early. That's I always encourage anybody, if you have a young man, that do it as early as possible that you can, because earlier is better.
So sports are a big thing for men, for a lot of men. You might say too big in a lot of cases, because it can absorb a man's life. A dad being involved with a son in sports in and of itself is wholesome. But I would imagine there are times when they cross the line on expectations. And do you see evidence of dads having expectations on their son for sports or maybe for a vocation? What does a son do in that case if it's not what he wants? How does mom help dad with breaking free of that? How do you undo that kind of expectation that so often cripples a family?
As a dad, you have to be willing to put yourself in the shoes of those you live with and to try to see from an outside perspective where things are. So be careful not to project upon your children what you would want, what you wanted for yourself. Maybe you wanted this or that in life, and don't try to make your son do that which you didn't do. Try to understand where he's coming from his perspective, and don't just project yourself upon your children. And also, don't try to hold them to unreasonable expectations. They're going to please you if they do this or that. Maybe that's more what you want and not who they are. So try to really pay attention, ask them questions. Be willing to also, don't just assert your authority all the time when they're 16, 17 years old. Have a little debate. A little healthy debate is good. Get them thinking about it. That's going to keep you on your toes as well, which is good for you, so you're not just a couch potato watching football all day.
Right.
So
right.
It's healthy, and you can't solve everything right then and there. So you know what, son, this has been a good talk. Let's think a little more about this, and let's talk about it tomorrow or the next day. And really, it's almost like, imagine you were teaching your son to box. You're gonna spar with him a little bit, and sometimes you might get a few shots on you there. Okay, good, that's all right. But back to the drawing board, maybe through some prayer, some reflection. You ask some advice, do a little research yourself, and then come back, or think more about the fallacies of what he was bringing against you, and you didn't have answers for at that moment. Well, come back to it a few days later. It's a process, and that's okay.
Immediacy is another bit of a scourge. We have a need for immediate resolution.
Right.
It's in our nature, our human nature, but I think it's also as Americans.
Wow, 30-minute episode, right? Everything's solved in 30 minutes.
That's right. That's exactly right. So that's, again, amazing advice. This has been a great talk. Let's come back to it tomorrow or the next day. I don't think we often think in terms of that. We think This is a problem that's been presented to me. It's my job as the head of the household to fix this problem immediately.
Right. Solution done.
Right. Did my wife just arrive here? Because I just sounded like her describing me. But that's exactly the thought process that goes through. And it's so wonderful to hear that. That's an option. It's an option, men. We can say, let's continue this conversation at another time.
And be willing to take the time. Because it does take time.
Yes.
Invest that time now. It pays off huge benefits.
Yes.
And do it in person. Don't do it on the phone, then they forget who they're talking to. Take the time to do it in person. Over a meal maybe, on a walk together, on a fishing trip, whatever, but do it together in person. You'll come out with a much better result.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
That's very good. So we've covered sports, we've covered their youth, their adolescence, and then they become adults. And they have families of their own. And as a dad, you look from the outside, and there are times and places where they need you, but it's a different dynamic because they're now a family of their own, a husband and a wife and children. And there's still a place for a dad in that, isn't there? And
Absolutely.
Where does he fit?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's important to make your children realize, too, that, you're not only teaching them by telling them things, or even by discussing or trying to persuade them. You teach them by how you've reacted to circumstances in your own life, by your mistakes, your failures. You teach them by saying, I'm sorry, by you bouncing back from difficult circumstances, even from your own mistakes. When they see that in you, they say, well, Dad, he came back, he repented of this, he grew from this. Then they realize that they themselves can say that they're sorry. They themselves can bounce back. They themselves can say they can move on from past failures. So I think as the children get older and become adults, you can share with them, son, you're going through something that I went through when I was a young dad myself. So try to share them with more experiences from your own life that you couldn't share with them when they were, 14, 16, 17. But when they're 25, 26, whatever, then you can really talk to them in a more mature way. And then they knowing that you as a dad have gone this route and experienced this or had this failure, this setback, whatever, encourages them, well, Dad went through that. It was tough for him, but he's where he is today. And so I too can overcome this weakness, this difficulty, this failure, and I can move on from that.
I think that builds a mutual respect too.
Yes.
And that becomes more and more important. I mean, it's always important, but it seems much more profound as they get older.
Yes, there's that famous saying, and perhaps one of you might remember, when I was 20 years old, I thought my dad was just, the dumbest man alive. When I was 30, I realized he was like the wisest man alive, right? Have you heard that saying before?
Absolutely.
Because you yourself have experienced it.
Yes, I was going to say, I live that.
Right.
It's true. So speaking of dads, when you told your dad that you wanted to be a priest, was he surprised?
Well, he always knew that I was interested in that. He himself had been in the minor seminary. I'm the oldest son, so he kind of passed on something there. I look a lot like my dad. I, have some gestures like my dad too, I think. So he wasn't surprised. He encouraged me, but he never forced it. He allowed me to make that decision. He told me, he said, I think this would be good for you, but he was completely open and free and allowed me to make my own decision. So when I did, I really felt it was something that was really something that I owned and that I wanted to do, and I knew I had his support. I knew it would make him happy, but still I did it because I wanted it, and I felt I was free to do other things if I wanted to.
Very, very important. And I imagine your mom was equally supportive.
Yes, thanks be to God. Yes, indeed.
Wow. So having that support, you think about what we've talked about for almost the past hour, so much of it is what's underneath it is support.
Right.
Support, acknowledgement, recognition, and encouragement. And those are vital elements that we need to offer for young men who live in a world, we'll say this over and over on every show. The statistic is 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's sad. 70% of second marriages end in divorce. So many young men who are left alone to try to figure some of these things out. And when I say alone, 52 weeks a year, maybe dad's with them 26 weekends,
right?
Maybe 1 or 2 weeks for vacation. Dads, it's very, very difficult on limited time, part-time, to make those connections with your boys. But we can't ask you enough, implore you, please make these connections that we've been talking about. Dads who are not living under the veil of divorce, you have such a golden opportunity to form the men that will lead us tomorrow and will bring us back to a Christian civilization the way God intended it. You've been listening to St. Joseph Radio in St. Louis, Missouri. This is Man to Man. My name is Mark Serafino, my co-host Michael Hayworth, and Canon Talarico. Thank you so much for being on our show. What an honor.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
West, St. Louis, Missouri. If you would like to join us in our evangelization efforts, you can order a copy of today's broadcast or any of our past programs by visiting us on our website, stjosephradio.net. That's SAINT, josephradio.net. Or call us 636-447-6000. It's all at your fingertips to help us evangelize the world, bringing the good news of Christ to everyone you meet and change one soul at a time. Thank you for your prayers and support. Until next time, may God bless you and your family. This has been a presentation of St. Joseph Radio Presents.